The elk calf cost $3 from the back of a merchant's wagon on a Tuesday morning in April, which was what it cost because the merchant wanted it gone before he reached Dodge City, and nobody between Liberal and the county line had offered anything at all. It was alive. That was the first thing Nora confirmed when she pushed through the small crowd that had gathered at the wagon's tailgate. A bull calf, maybe 2 weeks old, still carrying the spotted coat that elk calves wore for camouflage in their first months, curled in a nest of burlap with the large, dark eyes half open and the breathing shallow but present. The merchant had found it on the road outside of Elkhart 3 days prior, no cow nearby, the calf unable to stand, the kind of situation that produced either a dead animal in a ditch or a problem in someone's wagon bed, depending on the person who found it. The merchant was the second kind of person, but had since reconsidered. Nobody in the crowd wanted it. An elk calf was not a farm animal. An elk calf was a wild thing that would grow into a large wild thing with opinions. It was also, visibly, not well. The sunken flanks, the dull coat, the specific stillness of a young animal that has used most of what it had left just to still be breathing. Nora offered $3. The merchant took it before anyone could think of an objection. She loaded the calf into the truck bed on the horse blanket she kept behind the seat and drove home, which was 12 miles of dirt road and enough time to begin working out what she had just done and why. What she had was a Roosevelt elk calf. She was nearly certain of the identification from the coloring and the size, the spots arranged in 2 rows along the back, the way elk calves carried them, the ears proportionally large in the way of young ungulates. Roosevelt elk were the largest elk subspecies in North America. The bulls, the males, grew antlers. They grew them every year, starting each spring, reaching full size by late summer, and then shedding them in winter to begin again. The antler, while it was growing, was covered in velvet, a living, blood-rich skin that supplied the bone mass that elk antler was made of, and that was, she happened to know, worth considerably more per pound than the hard-shed antler that people found on the ground. She happened to know this because her father had known it. Her father had spent 2 years in the 1910s working a trading route between Kansas and California that took him through markets in San Francisco's Chinatown, and he had come home with a notebook full of observations about what sold there and at what prices and why. Velvet elk antler had its own page in that notebook. The Chinese medical market paid premium prices for velvet antler. It was used in traditional medicine preparations that had been continuous for centuries, and that were not going to stop because Kansas farmers didn't know what they had. The market was specific, the demand was consistent, and the supply was almost entirely imported from Asia. A domestic producer with a velvet antler operation would be the only one in Kansas. She had read that notebook page in January, after her father died, and she was going through his papers, and had thought, if I ever find the animal. On a Tuesday in April, she had found the animal, in the back of a merchant's wagon, for $3. She had not planned for this. She had not built a pen. She had not researched the husbandry. She had not found a buyer. She had $3 gone and a sick elk calf in her truck bed, and 12 miles of dirt road to work out what came next. What came next was the calf surviving the first week, which was the most significant uncertainty. A young ungulate separated from its mother at 2 weeks was a management challenge that required warmth, hydration, and a milk substitute that approximated elk milk closely enough to sustain it. Elk milk was richer in fat and protein than cow's milk. She found this in the agricultural reference section of the Dodge City Library on Wednesday, the day after the purchase, while the calf was in a box behind the kitchen stove, drinking a mixture she had improvised from whole milk and egg yolk and a teaspoon of cream that was not right but was closer than nothing. By Friday, the calf was standing. By the following Tuesday, it was investigating the kitchen with the alert, curious attention of a young animal whose survival instincts had reasserted themselves now that survival appeared likely. Her neighbor to the west, Cal Alderman, wheat and cattle farmer, 180 acres on the property directly adjacent, was at the west fence on that Tuesday. He had been at the west fence on Tuesdays since March, on the pretext of a shared irrigation channel that had been adequately addressed in March. He looked at the kitchen window, where the elk calf was visible with its nose against the glass examining him. "That's an elk," he said. "Bull calf," Nora said. 2 weeks old when I got him. He's 3 weeks now. Cal was quiet with the specific quality she had come to recognize in 6 weeks of Tuesday fence conversations. Systematic, working through information from the outside in before he arrived at a position on it. "What are you going to do with an elk?" he said. "Velvet antler," she said. "He'll start producing at 2 years. The velvet is harvested once a year in July before it hardens. The Chinese medical market pays by the pound." She looked at the notebook she was holding, her father's, the page she had read in January. "A mature bull Roosevelt elk produces 12 to 15 pounds of velvet per year." He looked at the calf in the window, at Nora, at the notebook. "The Chinese medical market," he said. "Through a broker in San Francisco," she said. "My father traded through that market in the 1910s. The pricing he documented was $12 a pound for quality velvet. That was 20 years ago." She paused. "The market hasn't gotten smaller." He was quiet for a long time. The arithmetic he was doing in his head was the same arithmetic she had done in the truck on the way home from the merchant's wagon. 12 pounds of velvet at $12 per pound was $144 per year from a single animal, more than the wheat had made in any of the 3 previous years. "One animal," he said. "To start," she said. "A bull and 2 cows by year 3. The cows don't produce velvet, but they produce calves, and calves become bulls, and bulls produce velvet." She looked at the calf in the window, who had lost interest in Cal, and was now examining the latch mechanism of the kitchen door with the focused attention of an animal that was going to be a problem in approximately 6 months. "I need to build a proper enclosure before he's mobile enough to make decisions I haven't made for him." Cal looked at the kitchen window. "What does a proper elk enclosure look like?" She told him. 8-foot fence minimum. Elk were powerful jumpers, and a 6-foot fence was an invitation. Steel posts rather than wood, because a mature bull elk could walk through a wood post fence if he decided to. A shelter structure for winter weather, an acre minimum per animal for grazing, more for a breeding operation. He listened. He went back to his side of the fence. She went back inside. He appeared on Saturday with steel posts and a post driver, which she had not asked for and which she received without comment because the posts were what she needed, and commenting on how they had arrived was not a productive use of either of their time. Before we find out what happens when this elk calf grows up, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. This channel reaches people from all across the country, and knowing where our stories land means everything to us. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. We have new stories every week. The calf's name was August, which she arrived at on the 3rd day when it became clear he was going to live and would therefore require a name. She named working animals for the month she expected them to produce. The velvet harvest came in July and August, when the antler reached full size but before it hardened. August looked at her when she used the name and blinked with the large, dark eyes, which she recorded in the notebook as appears to respond to name, or to the sound of speaking, difficult to distinguish at this stage. August grew. He grew the way elk grew when they were eating correctly and had recovered from their early crisis, in concentrated bursts that made the previous week's animal look like a different, smaller thing. The spotted coat faded by June. The legs lengthened. The neck thickened. By August, he was in the enclosure Cal had helped her build, correctly fenced, correctly sheltered, the acre of pasture he required, and he was moving through it with the beginning of the specific physical authority that bull elk carried even before they were anywhere near mature. The county noticed. The county noticed because an elk in a pasture was visible from the county road and was not a thing a person expected to see in Ford County, Kansas, in the 4th year of the Depression. and because visible, unexpected things generated commentary whether they were asked for or not. The commentary was largely what she had expected. He would escape, he would be dangerous when he reached maturity. She had wasted $3 and was going to waste considerably more before she learned her lesson. Elk were wild animals and could not be managed. This last point was the one she addressed directly, because it was the one that was most relevant to the operation's success. A velvet antler harvest required an animal calm enough to be handled during the procedure. The velvet was removed under anesthesia, a clean cut, the wound treated, and the animal returned to the pasture within an hour. But none of this was possible if the animal was unmanageable. She had been working on August's handling since the first week. Daily contact, consistent routine, the systematic desensitization that turned a wild animal into a farm animal over months of careful repetition. By October, he would stand for her to touch his face. By the following spring, at 1 year old, he walked to the gate when she came with the feed bucket and stood while she checked his condition with the patient tolerance of an animal that has decided a person is not a threat. She documented this in the notebook with the date and a brief assessment. She also noted, in the column she had started for long-term tracking, that his antler nubs, the velvet-covered bumps that would eventually become the full rack, had appeared in February at 11 months, which was earlier than she had expected, and which suggested the genetics of his line were producing on the aggressive end of the growth schedule. Cal came to the fence on Tuesdays and looked at August and said things that were worth hearing, and waited for what she said back, which was the dynamic that had developed since March and that had stopped needing the irrigation channel as its pretext in May, when she had told him directly that the channel was fine and that he could come on Tuesdays regardless. He had come on Tuesdays regardless. In March of August's second year, the antler began in earnest. What had been nubs in February became visible growth by March, the velvet emerging from the pedicles at the top of the skull, covered in the dense, soft skin that gave it its name, warm to the touch and carrying the faint heartbeat of active blood supply. She measured the growth weekly. The notebook recorded each measurement in 2 columns, left antler, right antler, the growth in inches per week. In March, it was 2 inches per week. In April, it was 3. By May, the antler was 2 feet long and branching into the first time formations that characterized mature bull elk antler. She wrote to the San Francisco broker in April. She had spent the previous winter finding him. The broker her father's notebook had mentioned by name had retired, but the trading company he had worked for was still operating under a different manager, and that manager had responded to her letter in February with the specific interest of someone who had been looking for exactly this for longer than she had been looking for him. Domestic velvet antler, no import duties, no shipping damage, consistent quality documentation. He wanted samples and a harvest date. She gave him July 15th. July 15th was 3 weeks before the antler would have reached full size, but she was making a deliberate calculation. First-year velvet from a 2-year-old bull was finer than the velvet from older animals, with a higher concentration of the compounds the Chinese medical market prized. She had read this in a veterinary reference she had ordered from the University of Kansas Library in February. Harvesting at peak size maximized weight. Harvesting before peak maximized quality. For a first-year crop establishing a relationship with a premium buyer, quality was the correct choice. The harvest required a veterinarian. She had arranged this in May. Doc Hennessy from the Dodge City veterinary practice, who had never performed a velvet antler harvest but who had administered equine anesthesia for 15 years and who had said when she explained the procedure from the veterinary reference she had brought to the appointment that he could do this. He came on July 15th with his bag and his professional calm and his slight expression of a man doing something outside his ordinary day. August was calm. She had prepared him for this over the previous 3 weeks, the presence of strangers, the handling sequence that preceded the procedure, the specific routine that told him something was going to happen without telling him what. When the anesthesia took effect, he went down gently in the clean straw she had prepared and lay still while Doc Hennessy made the cuts she had marked with chalk the previous day. 12 pounds of velvet. She weighed it on the kitchen scale 3 times to confirm the number. 12 pounds, 2 ounces. She packed it in the cooling container she had built from the extension office's specifications and drove it to the freight station in Dodge City that same afternoon. The broker's payment arrived in August. 12 pounds at $14 per pound. $168. She looked at the number in the notebook for a long time. Then she went to find Cal, who was in the east section of his property checking his sorghum emergence. She walked across the field line to where he was kneeling at the row edge and handed him the payment notice without saying anything. He looked at the number. He looked at August, visible across the field in his pasture, the antler stubs of the new growth already appearing on the freshly healed pedicles where the velvet had been removed. He looked at Nora. $14 a pound, he said. The first-year quality premium, she said. He'll do 12 to 15 pounds annually as he matures. At $12 per pound, the baseline rate, that's $144 per year from one animal. He looked at the pasture. You have one animal. For now, she said. I've been corresponding with a Wyoming ranch that manages a small elk herd. They have 2 bred cows available. The calves will be born next spring. At least one will be a bull. He absorbed this. 2 bred cows, he said. What are you paying? She told him. It was a significant number. Elk were not cheap, but it was less than 1 full year of August's velvet income, which meant the investment recovered itself within 12 months of the new bulls reaching harvest age. He looked at the notebook she was holding. At August. At Nora. You calculated all of this in April, he said. On the drive home from the merchant's wagon. Most of it, she said. I refined the numbers in January when I found the broker contact and confirmed the pricing. In January. Of this year, she said. When August was 7 months old. I wanted to see the antler development before I committed to the expansion. He was quiet for the specific amount of time he was quiet, when something had exceeded his expectation and he was reorganizing around the new information. Nora, he said. She waited. The irrigation channel, he said, that I came to look at in March. Which was resolved in March, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at August in the pasture. He was at the east fence of his enclosure, watching them both with the large, dark eyes of an animal that had been bottle-fed in a kitchen and had formed, over 2 years, a set of opinions about people that were more benign than the county had predicted. He did not look wild. He looked like what he was, a well-managed animal in correct conditions, producing what well-managed animals in correct conditions produced. Come to supper on Sunday, she said. Not about the elk, not about the Wyoming cows, just supper. He came at 5:45, which she counted. We're halfway through this story, and we want to know, have you ever seen an elk up close in the wild or on a farm? Or have you ever raised an animal that nobody around you understood? Leave us a comment. We read every one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your reminder. New stories every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The 2 Wyoming cows arrived in November, both bred, calves due in May. She quarantined them in the adjacent pasture she had prepared, separated from August by a double fence line because a mature bull elk during rut was an animal that managed itself differently than at other times of year, and the cows arriving in November were arriving during the tail end of rut season, and the separation was not a suggestion. August was 3 years old. His antler in the previous July had weighed 14 pounds. The first-year quality premium was behind him, but the increased mass made up the difference in total value. He was also, at 3 years, beginning to show the full physical development of a mature bull Roosevelt elk in a way that occasionally stopped traffic on the county road when drivers looked over the fence and did not immediately understand what they were seeing. A Roosevelt bull at full maturity stood 5 feet at the shoulder and weighed 700 to 1,000 pounds, with an antler spread reaching 4 feet. August moved with the authority of an animal that had no natural predators in a Kansas pasture and knew it. He also moved, when Nora came through the gate with the feed bucket, with the calm focus of an animal that had been correctly managed since the week after its birth. This was the outcome of 2.5 years of consistent handling. Not tame, managed, which was more durable. The county had stopped laughing in approximately September of August's first year, when the antler development had become visible from the road. By the second harvest, when the San Francisco payment number moved through the county the way concrete numbers move through drought year farming communities, rapidly and with full arithmetic attached, the position had updated to something the county expressed by sending its members to look at the operation from the fence line. She did not give tours. She answered questions from the fence. Cal handled the fence on Tuesdays. 3 other farmers wrote to her about the velvet antler market. She wrote back with the broker contact and the quality requirements and the management considerations. She did not give the Wyoming contact. The Wyoming cows and their bull calves were hers. The first calves arrived in May, 3 calves, 2 bulls, and a heifer, born in the early morning. Both bull calves were standing by 7. The heifer stood before noon. She wrote in the notebook, 3 calves, 2 bulls, both standing by 7 a.m. Good start. By the end of that year, the operation had August, 2 bulls at 6 months, the 2 cows, and the heifer. The velvet harvest that July produced 26 pounds between August and the elder Wyoming cow, who had produced a modest first rack. August's velvet graded at $12 per pound. The cow's first-year production went to a secondary buyer in Chicago at 10. Total payment. The number she wrote in the notebook and looked at for a long time before she went to find Cal. She handed him the notebook open to the numbers page. He looked at it for a long time. He looked at August in the pasture and at the 2 Wyoming cows and at the 6-month-old bulls that were going to be producing in 18 months. He handed the notebook back. Nora, he said. She waited. The irrigation channel, he said. Has been fine for 2 years, she said. Yes, he said. He looked at the pasture, at August. At the numbers page she had folded back into the notebook. I'd like to stop accounting for my time on Tuesdays with the irrigation channel. She looked at him, at the worn brown canvas cap and the patient pale brown eyes, and the 2.5 years of Tuesday fence conversations that had started with the channel and continued past it because they had both stopped needing it as a reason. You stopped accounting for it in May of last year, she said, when I told you the channel was fine and you came anyway. He looked at her steadily. I know, he said. She looked at August. He was at the near fence, watching the conversation with the large, dark eyes and the alert forward ears of a bull elk at 3 years who had decided this particular corner of the fence line was worth attending to. He was not wild. He was not tame. He was exactly what he was, the animal she had lifted from a merchant's wagon for $3 in April and had managed correctly through 2.5 years of notebook entries and weekly measurements and July harvests and Wyoming correspondence and fence conversations that had stopped being about the channel a long time ago. Come to supper Sunday, she said. Not about the calves, not about the broker, not about anything except supper. Sunday, he said. 5 o'clock. He came at 4:50. She counted it and said nothing about it and poured him a cup of coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table where August had once investigated the door latch as a calf and the operation that was going to produce 40 pounds of velvet the following July was outside in the pasture, and the numbers in the notebook were what the numbers were, and the farm that had been failing in February of 1934 was not failing now, and was not going to. Some things you found by accident in the back of a merchant's wagon for $3 on a Tuesday morning. Some things you built deliberately from a father's notebook and a broker's letter and a veterinary reference and a post driver borrowed on a Saturday. The best things were usually both. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. It means more than you know. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever found something nobody wanted that turned out to be exactly what you needed? On the farm or anywhere else? Your stories are why we do this. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next week with a brand new story.